Story 1. I thought they sort of just grew, I guess. I did not put much thought into my theory. I knew about pregnancy early on, but I did not know what leads to pregnancy. So, I thought the baby was like a plant and people just sort of appeared. Story 2. I thought they came from dancing. Hear me out. I watched too many Bollywood movies, and when a guy meets a girl, they have a song of their own and dance to it. Then suddenly they have a baby. I always thought if I danced with a guy I liked, I would have won. Story 3. My parents told me storks came and dropped off babies, but I thought that was made up by cartoons. I borrowed my oldest sister's health class textbook. I never had time to really wonder or make something up in my head because storks did not make any sense to me. I immediately went from birds, that does not make sense, to yes, now I know about reproduction in the span of about 5 days. I think I even had my big sister explain it to me because her health textbook was pretty vague. Story 4. I used to think that only if a husband and wife really loved each other, then she would suddenly get pregnant. Story 5. When mommy and daddy wanted a baby, God put a tiny seed in mommy's tummy and it grew into a baby. Story 6. I was told that God gives married couples a baby when they are ready, so I thought Jesus was just going around immaculate conceptioning people left and right. Like you would just be minding your own business and then wake up one day and bam, pregnant. I was genuinely terrified as a kid that I would become pregnant due to Jesus' magic, and during my nightly prayers, I asked him very sincerely to please not make me pregnant because I was very busy being a first grader and simply not ready for all that. Of course, I was told God could only give you a baby if you were married, but I thought that did not make a whole lot of sense because God could do whatever he wants. What if he wanted me, age 6, to be pregnant? Anyway, I made it to adulthood without becoming the next Virgin Mary, so clearly my childhood prayers worked. Checkmate. Atheists. Story 7. I always knew that babies came out of mommy's tummy, although I was never clear exactly how. My first belief was that it just happened automatically shortly after getting married. Because I was a very inquisitive little kid and asked a lot of questions about things I had seen insects doing, I found out that daddies had to attach themselves to mommies and transmit special cells for babies to be made. Since I had no sisters and had never seen any little girls naked, I did not know about the different body parts. I deduced that some belly buttons were innies and some were outies because they needed to fit together to make babies. If you wanted to have babies, you needed to marry someone who had the opposite belly button type from you. Between then and when I finally learned the truth about anatomy a couple of years later, I called belly buttons breeding buttons. Story 8. I genuinely believed that you just got pregnant randomly when you got older, so I was petrified of the idea of being pregnant because I thought I did not have a choice when it happened and my body would just decide. When I learned I did, in fact, have a choice, it was like my world shattered. Story 9. You pray to Mary, and then she will put the baby in your tummy. I tested this as a skeptical child, and it did not work. Thus, my agnosticism began to take root at a very young age. Story 10. I thought it was eggs like chickens, but instead of hatching outside, they hatched inside the mother and grew a little bit there. I was very disappointed when I found out the truth. Story 11. They were born in the hospital. You picked them up from the hospital. Babies develop in mothers' wombs after marriage. After considering all these stages, I now finally know the real truth that babies do not grow on trees. Story 12. I have to be honest, I never gave it any thought. It just goes to show how much I have never cared about having children. Story 13. My mom said they come from the stomach. Obviously, that is true, but I did not understand the significance of the question. I had only heard other kids ask that on television without realizing what I was asking. Later, when introduced to the concept of sex leading to pregnancy, I thought, oh, once I had that figured out, I thought they just came out of the butt. It was not until my friends laughed at me on the phone when I casually mentioned it that I had the full picture. Story 14. From the hospital. My Italian grandmother had all her babies at home. My aunts thought the doctor brought the babies in his bag. Story 15. Babies come from a woman married to a man. That is why my aunt, who lived with her female roommate in the 1980s, did not have children. Story 16. I thought they just happened like puberty. I became more convinced of this because every time my parents learned of someone being pregnant, It was surprising to them. Story 17. I thought a couple had to get married, and when they sealed the deal with a kiss, a baby would magically appear in the mother's stomach at any random time. Then I thought a slide would appear in the middle of the stomach, and the baby would slide out. My mom did not correct me. Story 18. I remember as a child being told that Chinese girls' vaginas are sideways. I am surprised we even function properly as adults given how strangely we are taught as children. Story 19. Sears catalog. I was 3 or 4 and pleaded with my parents to get a baby sister for me. Sadly, it did not happen. Now I feel bad as I still do not know why they did not have another child. Story 20. I have known for a while because I saw 2 bugs doing it and my mother had to explain, but before that I did not really care enough. Story 21. Belly button. In fact, there is a small folded piece of skin inside my navel that looks like a tiny butt, and I thought that was my baby. Story 22. Coming from a Christian household, I thought God just decided to make a woman pregnant and would always pray that he would not make me pregnant. Story 23. I knew babies come out of the mother's womb after growing there, but I thought the priest said special words at the wedding that started the whole process. By trying, I was not sure what they meant exactly. I believe single motherhood happened when those special words were said to the wrong person. At a very young age, I played home for single mothers with some of my dolls a few times. Yes, I had a big imagination and a big heart. I hope I still do. I was told the exact mechanism around age 9. I knew all other aspects of growing up and puberty, though I thought I would be a late bloomer. Almost all my classmates went through it before I did. Comprehensive sex education is an absolute must and needs to start young. Story 24. Okay, I knew where babies came from, but when I was a kid, I thought they were made from male urine. I know, gross. Story 25. My mother told me my father planted a seed in her but never went into detail. So I imagine my mother lying down while my father put a seed into her belly button, watered it, and boom. I am now here. Story 26. I knew they came from people. I had a babysitter who got pregnant when I was about 3 or 4 years old, and she told my sister and me that there was a baby in her stomach when she showed up all swollen one day. I couldn't figure out how the baby got in her stomach until years later. Story 27. I was taught that babies develop in the mother's womb after being with a man. I learned this right away, but I also thought we could buy babies. So I often asked my mom to buy me a sister. Story 28. I thought the stork came and cast a spell on the mother to make her stomach grow until the stork came back to take the baby out. Story 29. I played The Sims 4 on an iPad before I got the talk. When I pressed the woohoo option to have my sim get with someone, or if they had a partner, it would show an animation of a pulsating silhouette of 2 figures under the sheets in a heart-shaped light with kissing noises, giggling, and music. My young brain interpreted that as kissing a lot in the dark equals a baby in the stomach. I somewhat understood before the talk when I watched animals mating rituals out of curiosity and eventually got the gist of it. Story 30. I always knew they came from moms. I never believed in the stork story, but I think my parents just didn't tell me and always said they came from a mom's belly. However, I always thought it was just heavy makeout sessions. Ironically, I knew the idea of sex existed, but I still didn't connect that sex leads to babies, only heavy makeout. Story 31. I always knew where they grew and the 2 ways they could come out. I just always assumed it happened like magic. Story 32. I knew that the sperm fertilized the egg, but I thought it traveled from the man's belly button into the woman's. Story 33. No clue. It had something to do with a boy and a girl, and kissing to some extent is all I knew and cared about. Story 34. I thought a baby just kind of appeared there. I asked my boyfriend this question about a month ago, and he said he used to think that at a wedding, the baby appeared when the couple had their kiss. Story 35. I always knew where babies came from. My mom had the talk with us when we were very little. I think it is a great idea, and I am going to do that with my kids. It is good for kids to learn about their bodies before things get embarrassing and awkward. My mom also told me a big reason she did it was so if we were ever sexually assaulted, we could explain what happened. Story 36. My parents showed me the video of me emerging from my mother's vagina before I even thought about where babies came from, so I have just been knowing. Story 37. I knew that it came from women but thought that once they reached a certain age the baby would just be born. Story 38. I honestly do not know what I thought before when I was 8. I was in a treehouse with 2 friends, and they explained it to me very explicitly. I was kind of really disgusted by my parents. Story 39. I put zero thought into it. I had heard of sex but had no idea what it was, had no idea babies came from it, and would just call it sex like it was a bad word. I did not know why it was a bad word, I just knew it was. Story 40. There are rows of seeds with our baby photos on them, and when the time is right, God will plant the seed in our childbearing parent. Story 41. I have probably the weirdest one. I thought that when people get very old, they pop up like a balloon and shrink to become babies. This was probably because I never saw a pregnant woman of that age or never noticed. I probably thought she was just overweight. Story 42. I never thought about it. I was the youngest, but I could tell you where I wanted my brother to go. Story 43. I thought it happened when mothers and fathers kissed a lot. Having grown up in a very conservative home, I believed you became pregnant faster if you were married. Story 44. I don't remember what I thought, but kids at school would say that babies came out of their mother's breasts, which explained why breasts got so large during pregnancy. I don't think I ever actually believed it, though, but many kids did. Story 45. We were given the excellent, very descriptive book, How Babies Are Made, when I was 4 and my sister was 6. We were asking questions, and Mom told us. The book explained more. We had more questions, and Mom gave more answers. Until then, we had been told that moms and dads loved each other so much that they kissed, hugged, and wished for a baby. Then, if they were very lucky, they got one. Story 46. I didn't really think about it until I learned the truth. Those storks are such hard workers. Story 47. I honestly never had any desire to know. They are just there. I did not wonder where they came from or how. Story 48. I did not know and I did not care. As a little girl, I had assumed that at some point in every woman's life you just eventually felt pregnant. That terrified me because I hated the idea of babies. I remember being very concerned for my single aunt because she was around the typical age for pregnancy in her 30s in my simple kid brain. Story 49. We were watching Lassie on television and she showed up with puppies. My brother and I, probably 6 and 8 years old, figured out that Lassie scratched her stomach open on a rock and out came the pups. Our parents were sitting there and said nothing. We did not think about the wound or how she would avoid infection. Story 50. Well, as a child, I was told 2 people need to marry and pray to have a baby. When I grew up, I thought if you kiss and go under the sheets, you get a baby. Oh my God. Then I was told they need to have sex to have a baby. At that time, I thought sex was pumping twice and magically you have a baby. This last thought was when I was 25. Yes, I was very innocent. Story 51. I did not spend any time thinking about it as a child. The media at the time promoted that they were delivered by storks. Story 52. The first version was a stork. How or why one showed up was not mentioned, just that they drop off babies to couples. Story 53. I knew they came from pregnant women but did not know how they were created. I was 10 when I found out it was intercourse and not God. Story 54. HM. Come to think of it, I honestly have no idea what I thought. That feels a little weird. I got caught in the umbilical cord during birth and was born by emergency cesarean section. I was very aware of that aspect well before it ever occurred to me to wonder about what came before that. There are a lot of pictures of me still all bloody and I think still attached. Apparently, someone correctly guessed that using his camera would keep my dad from fainting. I'm old enough that his reaction has always been attributed to Vietnam War flashbacks. Story 55. I always knew about cesarean sections, so I thought every baby was born this way. I did not know about the uterus or fertilization, and I never questioned how women became pregnant. Story 56. I knew mommy was pregnant for as far back as I have memories, but the method of how that happened was a mystery to me. My parents divorced when I was 3, and I hardly have any memories of my birth father. so it never really occurred to me that a man was a necessary part of the equation. I guess I never thought about it too much. I knew it was something people wanted sometimes, and that it happened accidentally sometimes, but I always thought it just happened when someone wanted a baby. I think I was about 7 when I first asked my mom what sex was. I must have heard it from someone at school. I don't even remember. She explained the very basic mechanics, but not any side effects. I thought it made sense because I obviously knew boys and girls had different parts, and it made sense that they were supposed to go together, but I still didn't make the connection that babies came from that process. I think it took another year or two for the birds and the bees to finally come together for me. I specifically remember being in 4th grade and explaining it to a friend I had made that year. So sometime before that, I either made the connection or someone told me. This would have been in the mid-1990s, so I don't think I had the capacity to look it up myself yet. Story 57. When I was 2, I watched chicks hatching at my great-grandmother's farm and was convinced babies came from eggs. Story 58. I had a friend tell me when I was little that his mother and father lay on top of each other naked. I said, "Get out of here." Story 59. I did not think about it. I knew babies grew inside a mother and that it was separate from a normal stomach, but I just left it at that. Considering I was a very curious child and questioned everything else to an unbearable degree, it is strange I did not question this. I think it was probably because growing up, most of my relatives who got pregnant ended up losing the baby. I overheard a lot about stillbirths and miscarriages and visited graves for cousins I did not even know existed. I also knew I was a very premature emergency cesarean section and that both my mother and I almost died. So I think young me just associated pregnancy with bad things and death and never wanted to know more. Story 60. I was born into a highly religious household, so I was told that when a couple gets married, the wedding kiss is sacred and that God causes a baby to be conceived in the woman. Story 61. A stork. Before I actually found out where babies come from when I was 12, my dad told me a stork dropped me down the chimney. I was stuck believing that until I was 5 years old. Story 62. I had a random fever dream and believed it until I was 7. I thought babies came by eating too many eggs because, as a child, I thought baby heads looked like eggs. Story 63. I never thought about it. My mom came home with a new baby every 1 to 2 years, and I wouldn't stop asking, so she told me. I think I was 5 or 6. Story 64. I never had time to think about it. My mother gave me a comic book-style sex education book narrated by a bird and a bee when I was 5 or 6 years old. I read it on my own, and it did not leave me with any questions. Story 65. I actually knew about egg and sperm cells long before I learned where they are in the body, possibly in 1st or 2nd grade or even earlier. I thought a single sperm cell could cross over during a kiss, but only if the father wills it. It would enter the egg cell, and a baby would start to grow in an unknown area somewhere in the mother's abdomen. Story 66. I thought God just magically gave it to you. I had no idea that a process is required for that to happen. I remember praying to God not to give me a baby in my stomach. I really did. Story 67. I thought babies were just store-bought and put together like IKEA furniture. In my mind, a baby's parents got to pick out their features separately at a store and then brought them home to customize. This was because when I asked my parents where I came from, they told me they made me. I imagined them putting me together just like the couch they had just assembled. Story 68. I grew up in a very Muslim household but also had far too much access to the internet. I knew about sex at a young age but thought that Muslim people did not have sex and that God just decided when, or if you deserved a child you would get pregnant. I found out when I was about 13 that everyone had sex when I looked it up in a dictionary. All the boys were giggling over it. I am pretty sure I tried to convince them they were wrong as well. Story 69. I thought God would randomly make a woman pregnant after she got married. Not much logic to it, but when you are raised with religion, anything is possible. Story 70. I had a younger sibling born shortly after me, so I was always aware of pregnancy, but how one became pregnant was not explained. At the time, I thought only married people had babies together. I decided that there must be a secret step in a wedding ritual that activated the baby-generating power in the wife. I imagined it might be like a spell or a special drink that told the wife's body she was married and could now become pregnant. Story 71. I thought a guy and a girl just laid on each other stiffly and then kissed once, laughing my ass off. Thankfully, when I was about 5 or 6, my mom got me a Birds and the Bees book that explained everything. I never had the talk, just the books. My teachers were definitely concerned when I wrote book reports on that book, though. Story 72. I thought all you had to do was eat one of those baby shower bubble gum cigars, and you would have whatever color you ate. Story 73. I don't remember not knowing that a woman carries a baby in her body before giving birth. I do remember thinking that once you were married, conception happened spontaneously. I don't know why I thought marriage vows were directly responsible for a biological process, but it made sense until age 10. Story 74. I have younger siblings, so I knew they came from my mother, but I did not know how they arrived. I assumed that my mother just gave birth to them. Story 75. I walked in on my mother changing and asked why she had a giant scar on her belly. Keep in mind, this was the vertical scar they used back in the 1980s. She did not hesitate to inform me of my origins. Convincing the children at school that they did not have an avian origin was another topic altogether. Who knew 5 to 6-year-olds could have an existential crisis? Story 76. I found it pretty strange. I discovered pornography on YouTube when I was in 1st grade, but I never thought babies come from sex. Then I learned about sperm and eggs from a Bollywood movie. I thought that when a guy kisses a girl, sperm cells transfer from his saliva into the girl's body. However, I always knew I was wrong because I learned about sex shortly after, but I still didn't know how sperm actually entered the female body. I used to wonder if men urinate in the vagina or something like that. Then, in 8th grade, I found out from my textbook that men ejaculate in females. So that was it. Story 77. I do not know. My parents were not exactly euphemistic about it. They did leave out some details until I was older, but I knew babies grew in the mother and came out of the vagina for as long as I can remember. Story 78. I knew they came from a mother, and I knew they came from sexual intercourse when the sperm finds an egg, but despite all the biological diagrams, I did not have any actual idea what sexual intercourse was. I remember my complete shock and disbelief when I found out the penis went inside the vagina. I thought it was like a water gun or something. Story 79. The stork brought them and let them slide down the chimney. When my mother was pregnant with my younger sibling, I kept checking the fireplace. Then winter came and my parents started using the fireplace. It stressed me out, thinking they were going to burn the baby. Story 80. I once thought babies come from my mom's stomach because I thought we eat babies before passing them. Story 81. I assumed that whenever you got married, God just decided when he wanted to have a child and made it happen. Story 82. I was told God would put the baby there if the mother wanted one and prayed enough for one when my younger sibling was gestating in the womb. Story 83. I was born through cesarean section. I thought you had to cut the stomach and a baby would come out. We played a lot of doctor. Even when we had no clue, we always found abandoned babies somewhere. Story 84. I do not remember not knowing. I always knew where babies came from and denied the stork story from day one. It did not make sense to me. We grew up with animals, and there is no hiding from that sight. Story 85. How the baby came to exist is explained by the fact that mothers are adults who sometimes have babies. Story 86. I never thought about it. I was too busy thinking about questions like, am I the only person with consciousness? And is everyone else fake? Only here to convince me that reality is real? And do we all see color the same? If we looked at the same cup, do we both see green? Or am I seeing green and you are seeing purple? Also, I wondered, is there any way I could focus really hard, shut off my senses, change reality while it is not being observed, then focus back on reality and cement my changes? I was a very unusual child with no friends. Story 87. My dad said that we came from his testicles, and I was very disgusted by it because my dad does not have good hygiene and he smells unpleasant. Story 88. My father was and still is terrified to even hear the word sex, so I told a big lie. He said they asked God for a baby, and then he went out into the woods behind the house and found me by a stump. He said a stork left me there. Now, I don't believe in storks or God. Way to go, Pops. Story 89. I thought that the woman would just get pregnant with the man's baby because her body would know that she is ready. Story 90. I thought there was a store, and it kind of looked like that aisle with all the Buzz Lightyear toys from Toy Story. Every box was either pink or blue. Story 91. I thought it came out of the belly button, and private parts were only for using the bathroom. I was horrified and confused when I found out the truth. Story 92. I thought sex was oral sex because you would swallow and the sperm would go to your stomach. Pregnant women always had babies in their stomachs. Then I assumed that you passed them out when you pooped. When I was 10, I took a first aid course, and the manual had a section on birth with illustrations and diagrams. Story 93. I asked too much when I was about 4, and my mother was pregnant with my younger brother. By the time she started evading, I had reached the point where she told me that babies came from the mother's tummy. I asked if there was a third hole and she evaded. I never forgot that evasion. It set the standard for things I couldn't ask my mother. At 7, Sonia Whaley showed me the whole setup and explained what she knew about it. I asked her if she thought they were supposed to fit together. She didn't know how that would work, and neither of us had any interest in trying it out. We both had our answers and our curiosity was satisfied. I never thought about it again until I was in my teens and wondered where she went when we both moved away. She was my best friend's twin and set my standard for what I like in girls. Long dark hair and sharp as a tack. Story 94. It just happened. You wanted a baby, and just like that, you have a baby. I was young when my sister had her first child and always wondered how it happened, especially because her boyfriend was never around. Story 95. I thought if the mother and father wanted one badly enough, God would come down and implant it in the mother. I was a dumb child, I know. Story 96. I thought when you got married, you just became pregnant. Whenever I saw teen pregnancies on the news, I got very confused. Story 97. I was told they came out of mom's belly. So I pictured a black hole opening up on a woman's stomach and the baby just flying out. Story 98. I thought for a while we were just exhausted. If a woman and a man were near each other for too long, the woman would get pregnant. Story 99. I knew they came from two people, but I assumed they did the bird and reptilian mating, where they have sex and then the mother lays an egg. Story 100. I literally thought women just became pregnant randomly in their lives without a man. I believed that at some point, the universe would decide it was time to be pregnant. When I was little, I was always worried because I wondered, what if the universe decides I do not get to be pregnant? As for how I thought children were born, I believed they came out of the belly button. Story 101. I do not recall ever wondering, but I must have said something because my mother sat me down and gave me a talk that did not register at all. Story 102. I didn't really think much of it, but I had two theories. The stork, which is pretty common, and I had Yoshi's Island for the Nintendo DS, so it was not too out of left field. They simply pop into existence out of thin air. However, I watched Revenge of the Sith many times during childhood to eventually figure out they at least come from a woman. Story 103. I was told by my cousin that they came out of mom's belly button and that mom would get pregnant when mom's and dad's nipples touched. Story 104. I thought that when a man and a woman were married, sometimes the woman would just randomly become pregnant. Based on my observations of my parents and my friends' parents, it made perfect sense. Story 105. I thought that when people had menstrual cramps, it meant they were having contractions, which means they were pregnant. Story 106. I did not really consider how the baby got there, but I felt fairly confident that once it was there, the mother's belly button stretched until it was large enough for the baby to come out. Story 107. I do not remember thinking about that during my childhood, but I do remember thinking Labor Day was when all the women went into labor. Story 108. I was a big animal nerd and watched a lot of Animal Planet. I knew storks did not deliver babies. Otherwise, David Attenborough would have mentioned it. I also knew babies came from their mom's stomach and had a general idea from animal documentaries but I never really connected the two until my mom sat me down to explain it. It was strange, but I liked learning, so I said, cool, and gained the needed context for other animal documentaries. Story 109. My parents are medical doctors, so I received a very clear medical explanation at a young age. I remember thinking that all babies were delivered by cesarean section for a while. Story 110. I figured it happened after you got married, like you would just get pregnant at some point. I did not know anyone who had babies without being married. I was really into animal books as a kid, so I actually did know what sex and mating were from one of them. However, I thought that it was not something that humans did. I thought humans were special and just got pregnant. One day, I think I was about 9 or 10, and I was thinking to myself, it is weird that humans do not mate. Then I thought about it a bit longer and realized I had no evidence to suggest that this was actually the case. I came to the conclusion that humans actually did have to do that too. I was at the grocery store with my mom, internally realizing where babies actually came from. Story 111. I'm the oldest sibling, so I knew about pregnancy being the source of new babies, but I was under the impression that sleeping together was literal and that it would somehow happen if a man and a woman slept in the same bed. I remember having a sleepover with my cousin and insisting on sleeping on the floor. Laugh out loud. Story 112. A man and a woman kissed deeply. One of the man's testicles traveled up his throat, into the woman's mouth, and she swallowed it. This was a short-lived theory once I remembered I had 2 younger brothers. Story 113. I feel like I always knew where, but I thought the "I now pronounce you husband and wife" part of the wedding did it. Then I found out I was 1 year old when my parents got married, so I believed it was kissing naked in water because of a music video I saw one time. Story 114. I did not really know how at all until it was from sex, but as a very small child, 3.5 years old, I remember asking my mother, "How did my sister get into your tummy?" She just said, "Dad put her in there." I asked, "How?" She said, "He just put her in there." I said, "Yeah, but how?" After that, I forgot about it for the most part until I really learned how. Story 115. Well, being the curious child that I was, I had already looked it up in the library by the time I was 9 and found out what the ingredients were. I just did not really understand the mechanics until I was much older. Story 116. I don't know why, but my siblings and I thought they were watermelon seeds. Obviously, this was before seedless watermelons. We made sure we did not swallow them by accident. Story 117. I was too young to consider it before I knew for real. It was explained to me when I was young enough that I didn't have any other idea about it. My parents were pretty open about explaining that kind of thing. Story 118. I assumed the child just randomly grew in the womb of an adult woman. I did not know that sexual reproduction was involved. Story 119. I was told that if 2 parents pray to God, He will make them parents. Needless to say, I spent a lot of time praying to God that I would not be a parent. Story 120. I knew babies came from the mother, but I guess I was clueless about how they got there and how they came out. I learned a lot in class that day. Story 121. I thought a man and a woman got married by kissing, and after they are married, a baby can randomly form in the woman's belly. Then she pushes the baby out through her birth canal, which somehow does not create a gaping hole in her body. Story 122. My mom is the youngest among the 4 sisters. She is the only one who has children. Back then, I thought I would have a child when the time comes because I am the youngest girl. I have an older sister and 2 brothers. Story 123. I don't remember not knowing. I read many books that were for older children and adults and had pretty much figured the whole thing out by 6 or 7. Story 124. I never really put much thought into it, especially because I never had any younger siblings. I know I first learned about pregnancy through the Bible, and with that, I likely also learned that it usually takes some sort of deliberate action. However, I don't think the Bible is a great place for kids to learn about that because for years I was constantly stressed out that God would just decide to put a baby in me like what happened to Mary. Story 125. When I was 8 years old, I prayed for a year that God would deliver a baby to me on my front porch in a basket. Every morning when I opened the door, I was disappointed. Story 126. I knew about sex and pregnancy and thought it came out like stool. In fact, I was molested at age 5, and for years when I had a bowel movement, I was worried I would give birth. I had forgotten about that. Story 127. Funny thing is, I grew up in a large family. I have 9 siblings. I never once wondered until I hit middle school. Story 128. I was a logical child, so I had figured it out before sex education. Everyone was so upset, and I was confused as to why no one had connected the dots. Story 129. I had no idea how they got in there, but I knew they had to be cut out of the stomach because my mother came home with a big cut and a new baby. Story 130. I know this is not what you meant, but when I was 3, I saw my mother give birth to my little sister in a bathtub. So I saw that and thought, oh, babies come out of the butt. And I believed that for an embarrassingly long time. Story 131. I have known about fertilization since 3rd grade, but I never really thought about the process until my teenage years. Now I am working on artificial wombs, and it challenges me to figure out different ways to create conditioned blood for a vascular bed that embryos can grow on. Story 132. I had a friend who thought they came from Target when she was little because she always saw babies in the carts at Target. It makes sense in kid logic. You buy the stuff that you put in your cart at Target, so you must be buying the babies that are in your cart. Story 133. When I was very little, I already knew that babies come from women. Nobody hid that fact from me. However, I of course didn't understand how. Until I learned in elementary school, we have a very kid-friendly health and sex education class in 4th grade here. I assumed the doctor opens the belly button of the woman like there are tide strings similar to a present. The doctor just undoes the bow inside and takes the baby out. It is a bit embarrassing but also kind of cute, I think. Story 134. I thought they came from the Sims bathroom. Before making love was a thing, if you kissed enough, a baby would appear. I thought at the time that the bathroom was the place. My parents got divorced when I was young, so I did not know anything. But yes, I thought kissing a lot would bring on a baby. Story 135. No clue where I got this idea from, but before I gave the talk, I was under the impression that after you turned 18, a baby could just spontaneously generate inside you at random. It really freaked me out because I kept thinking, what if I turned 18 and was not ready for a child? Story 136. When I asked where they came from, Mom put on the miracle of life. I was satisfied with that answer until I realized it was men who put the semen into women. As a woman, I found that to be profoundly strange, not unsettling, just strange. Story 137. I recall in my youngest years actually believing the storks dropped babies off in little satchels, like in cartoons. I did not question where they got them until I was probably about 8 years old. Then, with exposure to shows like South Park and movies with certain scenes I should not have been watching, combined with an explanation from an older sibling, I figured it out. Story 138. As boys, we thought everyone had penises and never considered how babies were made. So, the penis, I think. Story 139. I thought they came from the sperm cell and the egg cells that lived in your lips, and you got pregnant through kissing. Being able to understand cellular biology but not sex at the age of 5 is unusual. Story 140. I believed at one point that we all came about as we are, not even as babies, just as we are, naked inside a pod in a facility. Then I grew wise and believed, as Disney told me, that it was the storks. Then I grew wiser still and understood it came from the mother. But the critical question was, how did the baby get the father's DNA? My disgust upon learning the truth at 12 in a do-it-yourself class, while sewing, was palpable. Story 141. I literally thought they just appeared randomly in your house and that they were your problem now. Story 142. I remember understanding that they were in your stomach, and I thought they had to come out of your mouth. Story 143. God spontaneously created them whenever he pleased, and the baby magically appeared from the mother's belly. Story 144. 1. Thought your body just knew when you were married and then became capable of growing a baby. 2. My mom had a cesarean section for me, so my sibling and I thought you could decide where you wanted your baby to come out of. One of us said we would want our baby to come out of our mouth. Story 145. The hospital did not realize that the lady had a bump and that they carried the baby around until it was born. I had no clue. I was the youngest in the family, so I never lived with a pregnant mother. Story 146. I didn't think about it too hard. Parents come back with random things like groceries, dinner, a new kitten, or all sorts of items. So bringing home a new baby just made sense too. Story 147. Honestly, I just thought a child appeared once you got married. It freaked me out a little because I have never wanted to have children and worried about automatically having one if I ever got married. Story 148. Well, my mother told me directly that I came out of her tummy, but as a child, I believed that meant they cut her stomach open, pulled baby me out, and then sewed it back together. I was very young, okay. Story 149. I thought it happened to adults if they ate too much and their bellies got big, and then the baby would come out from the belly button. When I was 2, I told my father that if he ate too much, he would have a baby in his belly like mommy. Story 150. I mentioned the birds and the bees to my dad, not knowing what that even meant, but he decided that was his opportunity to tell me. I was not ready. Story 151. When I was really little, my parents told me that babies happen when a mommy and a daddy love each other very much. I said, "You can get pregnant just from feelings? Well, that doesn't seem safe at all." And I decided I should stop having a crush on the boy who sat next to me in kindergarten class. My favorite answer to this is from my friend who was adopted as an infant. When he was around 3, he asked his parents where babies come from, and they said, "Well, we got you from the adoption agency." For years, he thought that everyone was adopted, which upset a lot of his classmates when he started kindergarten. Story 152. My mom was a prenatal teacher when I was little. The moment I started wondering, she pulled out her teaching tools and taught me. Story 153. I always thought that one day a baby would appear in the stomach. Then, when the baby was ready to be born, the doctor would cut straight into the stomach and pull out the baby. That was my version of a cesarean section, I guess. Story 154. Jesus. I was told from a young age that when 2 married people love each other, Jesus sends a baby from heaven. Then, when a girl in my neighborhood got pregnant and was not married, I was like, wait a minute. My super conservative Christian parents scrambled for an answer before telling me the actual way very awkwardly and quickly. I was 10. Story 155. Sex. I didn't know exactly what it was or how it worked, but I knew it came from moms and dads, and I came out of my mom somehow. So I knew sex was a thing. Story 156. Sex. I didn't know exactly what it was or how it worked, but I knew it involved moms and dads, and that I came out of my mom. So I knew sex was a thing. Story 157. In 4th and 5th grade, I was terrified that God might choose me to be the next Jesus, and I would cry almost every night in shame and fear. I became an atheist. Story 158. Now I have seen pregnant women as a child and knew those were babies in their wombs, but I never understood where the baby could possibly come out. My first assumption was that the baby came out of the mother's mouth, like literally being vomited out. Story 159. When you get married, an angel comes at night and gives you a baby in the stomach. Who knew the angel coming at night would be my father? Story 160. I thought a woman could get pregnant just by a man and a woman hugging each other for a long time while wearing clothes. Story 161. I just thought that a man and a woman had to love each other very much and then she would get pregnant. When I was younger, I wrongly deduced from a television show that sex was actually birth control. Story 162. Well, I did not really think about where babies come from until one day I suddenly had that question. 5 minutes later, I no longer had that question and wished I never had it. Parents, please monitor your children's internet access. Story 163. I don't remember not knowing, nor how I first learned the truth. But I do distinctly remember pretending I didn't already know when my dad told me the real story around age 7 or 8. I guess I thought I'd be in trouble for knowing already. I had more than a few "where did you learn that?" questions from adults previously, and something told me this would be even more uncomfortable. When he asked whether I understood or what I thought, I said, "Oh, I just thought that the priest said the magic words at the wedding and then the wife gets a baby." It's worth noting that my family has never been religious, so I have no idea where that came from, and I don't think my dad believed a word of it anyway. Story 164. I thought if you ate raw fish, you would instantly get pregnant. I was terrified of raw fish for years. Story 165. I don't remember not knowing, nor how I first learned the truth, but I distinctly remember pretending I did not already know when my dad told me the real story around age 7 or 8. I guess I thought I would be in trouble for knowing already. I had more than a few "where did you learn that?" interrogations from adults previously, and something told me this would be even more uncomfortable. When he asked whether I understood or what I thought, I said, "Oh, I just thought that the priest said the magic words at the wedding and then the wife gets a baby." It is worth noting that my family has never been religious, so I have no idea where that came from, and I do not think my dad believed a word of it anyway. Story 166. I thought if you ate raw fish, you would instantly become pregnant. I was terrified of raw fish for years. Story 167. My best friend and I thought we all had tiny miniature babies inside us that would grow slowly, and when we got married as adults, they would be ready to come out. Story 168. My understanding is a bit elaborate and unusual. I thought a mother and father prayed to God to ask for a baby. We were not very religious. If God said yes, he either magically put the baby in the mother, or you went to the doctor and the doctor put the baby in for 9 months. I was not sure which. Then when the baby was fully developed, you went to the doctor again and he delivered the baby. Story 169. I used to ask my mother about it, and this is what she told me. An angel brings babies in a basket filled with flowers and hands it over to the mother. I believed it for a very long time. I remember asking my mother, "Okay, so it means when the angel brings babies, then doctors can see the angels?" Wow. Story 170. I did not really think about where babies came from because my earliest memory is understanding that babies come from mothers' bellies. However, I thought babies born by cesarean section were aliens from space, but I blame my mom for that belief. She was pranking me and then forgot to tell me it was a prank. I never really asked how babies got inside mothers' bellies. I think mainly because when my mom got pregnant when I was 11, my parents explained how babies are made, and I was fine with that. Story 171. Our cat had kittens when I was about 4, so I have known. I did not necessarily picture people having babies, but it was not something I wondered about. Gerbils 2. Story 172. I thought that once you were married for a while or living together as long-term partners, pregnancy just happened naturally. I found out that was not the case when I searched why my simulation character was not getting pregnant and discovered they had to engage in a specific action called woohoo. Story 173. We used to think that kissing on the lips could result in pregnancy. My friend M and I were too scared to kiss each other for that reason. Story 174. I cannot remember. My parents explained the facts of life to me when I was about 5 years old, after I asked why one frog was riding on the back of another frog. Story 175. My atheist mother told me you pray to God and then get a baby in your belly. She never explained how the baby comes out of your belly. Story 176. I just thought that it magically happens after the wedding day. I also thought that all of these babies are made on the wedding day somehow. Story 177. I didn't know, and I didn't try to fill in the blanks. I had heard the story about the storks, but it didn't make sense to me because I understood that I was half mom and half dad, so it didn't add up. I just assumed I would learn about it when I got older. Story 178. I assumed that it was a natural occurrence that would happen as a result of being together for a very long time. Story 179. My parents have always been open with me and never lied about where babies come from, just omitted some gory details when I was younger. When I was really young, I didn't think people had a choice or did anything to have a baby. I assumed that some unexplained power handed out babies and placed them in the stomachs of women in relationships whenever it felt like it. No one gave me this impression. It was something I completely made up in my head. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.